Hi guys, let's talk about Corpse Party. Corpse Party is a recurring topic on this channel. Being the game that pioneered RPG Maker horror games, it's one of the most important games to exist in the genre. If you don't know what Corpse Party is, let's delve into the history. Corpse Party was originally an indie adventure horror game made in the RPG Maker Dante 98 engine by Kennecksoft. The game was released in 1996 as part of a software magazine in Japan known as Login Softcom. It appeared in several issues of the magazine, with updates being placed on each volume after Volume 6. Around the time that the game was being developed, there was a contest being held for the Dante 98 software. The idea of the contest was to see what amateur game creators could make using their software. Corpse Party was submitted to the contest, and ended up being in the top 3 of games that were seen as some of the best submissions to be created. The creator, Makoto Kedowin, going by his online name Kedwin, was granted a large sum of money as part of being a winner of the contest for his game. The premise of the original Corpse Party is that 4 high school students and 1 middle school student sit in a circle telling ghost stories about a girl, no older than them, dying inside an abandoned school building that has since been replaced by their own school, which stands on the same property today. Shortly after telling the story, weird things start to happen. An organ can be heard in the music room, and before long, all 5 get swept away and teleported into the abandoned school building from the ghost story. To introduce the 5 main characters, meet Satoshi Mochida, a 17-year-old sophomore student who is the main character of the game. He also has a little sister who he cares for a lot. Yuka Mochida, a 14-year-old middle school student who acts and looks much younger than her age. Satoshi has also been in the same class with someone for a very long time, that being Naomi Nakashima, a girl who is pretty aggressive and to the point. She also seems to be Satoshi's love interest. As I previously mentioned, all 5 were busy telling ghost stories before all this happened. The person telling these stories is named Ayumi Shinozaki, the class representative of Satoshi's classroom and a horror story fanatic, rumored to always be carrying candles for scary storytelling opportunities. It's also believed that she tells stories and carries candles to facade her own fear. While in the abandoned school, Ayumi is protected by a boy named Yoshiki Kishinuma, a friend of Satoshi's who seems to have feelings for Ayumi. However, Ayumi seems to like Satoshi a lot more, so Yoshiki is trying his best to convince Ayumi to like him during the entire ordeal. He could be seen as cynical and a jerk at times, but he's just being honest. When Satoshi wakes up inside the abandoned school, he finds Naomi with Yuka popping in. Yoshiki and Ayumi are also along for the ride, and what they conclude is that there should be 2 groups to survey the school and look for a way to escape. With how I introduce the characters, you might be able to figure out who goes with who. Since there's 5 characters here, one group has 3 people while the other only has 2. Satoshi, Naomi, and Yuka are on one group with Yoshiki and Ayumi on the other. Both groups go towards different parts of the school, and they both come across different obstacles and challenges that face them while exploring the school. Satoshi's group finds out that the school they're in is something like a distortion of space-time, where only a few people are summoned into the school by vengeful spirits. Something that a lot of people get confused about is why they were the ones chosen to be summoned in the first place. To answer that, well, there's not really a definite answer, but maybe there's a theory that could be made based on a certain aspect of the game's story. To explain, there are 10 little notes that you find that were left behind by previous victims of the school. With how the notes are written, the victims were 2 girls, sisters. In the last few notes that you find, they say something about the vengeful spirit that summoned them to the school. Someone who has the last name Shinozaki, which happens to be Ayumi's surname. This could imply that Ayumi has ancestral connections to whoever brought them into the school, which in turn could explain why only her and the other 4 that she was with were brought into the school after telling the story of how her ancestor died. Unfortunately, there's not much else towards Ayumi's family in the game. Perhaps the notes and what happens in the beginning were ways to explain to the player why they ended up here, but it feels too cloudy to concretely say that's the truth of the matter. Speaking of the vengeful spirit, as described in the ghost story, she is a girl that's no older than the 4. Midway through the game, Yoshiki and Ayumi are teleported back to their school for a brief period. During this brief period, the vengeful spirit shows up to explain the backstory of what happened to the girl in the ghost story, detailing that a male instructor was sexually harassing the girl before she ended up offing herself to get away from him. Afterwards, the male instructor and the principal had an agreement to hide the body and never speak about what happened, a cover-up. The girl, now as a vengeful spirit, spirit, cursed the instructor multiple times until her spirit split into two. So there is actually two vengeful spirits. One that embodies all the hatred the girl had, and one that embodies the kindness the girl had, after the moment of death. The good spirit claims that the evil spirit is too interested with the other three that they can't be brought back to the current day school. Because of this, the spirit tells both Ayumi and Yoshiki to go back to the school, go deep into the school, underneath the floorboards, and dig up the girl's body so that both spirits can rest in peace. Yoshiki and Ayumi agree to go back, and they tell Satoshi's group about what they have to do. Satoshi's group and Yoshiki's group meet up after a few puzzles, and they run into the girl's body. The girl's spirit tells them to go away, but the gang insists to help her rest in peace. But then the evil spirit steps in and tries to sabotage the entire situation. Now the gang has no choice. If they want to do what they've been tasked to do, they must fight back. During this part of the game, you get to pick 2 to 3 party members to fight the evil vengeful spirit. According to a few sources, the battle was put into the game to comply with the contest's demands, which were that the game had to have at least one battle, so it made it into the contest as a hoax. Depending on which people and how many people you pick to be on your party, the vengeful spirit's fight will either be very easy or extremely hard. If you want to have it the easy way, I'd recommend choosing Satoshi and Yoshiki. Satoshi has no magic abilities but can be a hard hitter. Yoshiki has magical spells that he can cast to raise the damage caused from an ally's attack. Plus the game gives you more healing items with this team, and the vengeful spirit is extremely weak, barely able to leave a dent. Give it a try and let me know if I helped you out to get past this fight. Anyways, after the battle's over, the evil spirit is defeated and the girl reveals her true appearance, thanking the gang for letting her rest in peace. But now that the evil spirit is gone, the school is about to collapse with little time left. Satoshi and the gang rush to classroom 29 and make their exit. Everyone is back home, and Satoshi gets to go on a date with Naomi. Sweet. And that's the true ending of Corpse Party. The game itself has endings that, when completing them, show a rank of which ending you got. The true ending is considered A rank, with D2 being the lowest rank possible. How you obtain each ending depends on what you do inside the school and which people die. Overall, the original Corpse Party was what I started out with when I found out about it. It was a really interesting and fun game to play back then, and even now, it's still considered one of the best games, enough to warrant others to create RPG Maker horror games of their own. Fan-made games of Corpse Party started being made around the mid-2000s, with Corpse Party 0 being the most famous. Even a fan-made remake titled Rebuild was created in the RPG Maker XP engine to let people play the original game on modern hardware, which illustrates just how important of a game this was to people. Anyways, that's the original Corpse Party. But there's still more to this path of history, so let's keep going. Originally, Corpse Party was going to have a sequel titled Corpse Party 2 Satsuki's Heart. It would be developed using the same engine as the first game, and it already had a story and some new characters established. Unfortunately, the sequel would never see a release, being cancelled when RPG Maker Dante 98-2 was released. Because of the cancellation, many fans have been taking cracks at creating this cancelled game we have so little information on. The only content we have of this sequel is the background music developed for it, and information that was posted on Japanese internet forums that has been translated into English by Memories of Fear, a group dedicated to translating the vast majority of Corpse Party fan games and other content that has since retired at the beginning of 2021. 10 years after Corpse Party had its share of fame in Login Softcom and on Enterbrain's website, Kedwin decided that he wanted to re-envision Corpse Party. He had started work on a new Corpse Party, one that had more story, characters, scares, and lots more that the original couldn't have due to hardware limitations. I present Corpse Party New Chapter, an indie mobile phone episodic adventure released from June to December of 2007 by Team Grigri, formerly known as Kinectsoft. Unfortunately, New Chapter cannot be downloaded anymore, and the only devices that could download the game were phone models that were listed on the website for the game. What you're seeing on screen is one of the 2 videos that we have of Corpse Party New Chapter's gameplay. The game was made in RPG Maker for mobile, an engine similar to RPG Maker 2000 and 2003. The entire look of the game was enhanced from what we saw in the original. The characters' designs and personalities were altered to appeal to a modern audience. New Chapter only had chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 released, with a 5th chapter never releasing. That's because New Chapter was abandoned in favor of something much bigger. Introducing Corpse Party Blood Covered, a Windows PC port and remake of Corpse Party New Chapter that also released episodically from December 2007 to July 2011. This version introduced visual novel busts for all the characters to coincide with the face portraits that were in New Chapter. Both the face portraits and visual novel busts were illustrated by different people. The face portraits were illustrated by Kedwin himself, while the visual novel busts were illustrated by Sakuya Kamishiro, an artist who is still very much involved with Corpse Party today. Partial voice acting was also added in during the development of Chapter 2, with full voice acting being added in as part of Chapter 5. The voice cast being people who were hired from the internet to do voice work. This version would also later be localized and released on Steam in 2016. Alongside this Windows PC port, we have the first version to be localized for the Western audience. Introducing Corpse Party Blood-Covered Repeated Fear, also known simply as Corpse Party in the West. Releasing on the PlayStation Portable in Japan in 2010 and in 2011 in North America. This is the version that most are familiar with in the Western side of the community, as a lot of Let's Players played the game on their YouTube channels back when Corpse Party was relatively popular. The game was given a complete facelift thanks to a deal struck between Team Grigri and 5PB, who go by the name Mages nowadays. Since Corpse Party got popular as an indie PC game, 5PB had wanted to make Corpse Party into a commercially made series with professional voice acting, artwork, and presentation overall. In my opinion, while the PlayStation Portable version is the most well-known, it's also the worst performing version of the game. The character's movement is very sluggish, which makes it difficult in situations where movement becomes your enemy due to how slow the game is. This is no thanks to the game being forced to run at 30 FPS, which it was never meant for. The specifications of the PlayStation Portable system barely meet the requirements to be powerful enough to run this game. It's also not possible to skip dialogue, which was a feature the PC port already had. Despite that, people still really enjoyed what the PSP version of Corpse Party had to offer, but if you want my opinion, years later, a better version of the game was released. Going under the same name as the PSP version, the game was released on the Nintendo 3DS in 2015. The in-game sprites were all redrawn to complement the visual novel busts and face graphics better. The soundtrack got a revision too, with Chapter 1's theme melding together with the rest of the other tracks in the game. New endings and content were added on top of what was in the PC port and the PSP versions of the game. This also runs smoother than the PSP version, running at a decent frame rate and controlling very well. The movement doesn't feel sluggish this time around, so now scenes that require the most movement don't feel awkward to play. And finally, it's now possible to skip dialogue, making replaying through scenes to get certain endings less tedious than before. Before I go into detail into the game's story, I'd like to introduce one last version of the game. To those who have watched my channel before may remember that I made a mod for the 2016 PC version of the game, which replaced all of the artwork and voice acting to match the PSP and 3DS versions of the game. This was to silence all the complaints that I heard about the Steam version. However, recently in 2021, a new version of Corpse Party would surface. Still going under the same name as the PSP and 3DS versions, Corpse Party was released on Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and Steam, under the name Corpse Party 2021 in the West. This version has a few minor oddities, but is still the best way to play the game on modern devices, and will be the version that I will show for the rest of this video. Since there's still quite a bit to go through, I will try to cover what I can in order to make the video not too long. So let's talk about it. The modern version of Corpse Party is a reimagining of the original PC-98 version of Corpse Party. The story follows the same beats. People tell a ghost story, get teleported to a haunted school, they try to find a way to escape and make it out alive. But what's different is how certain story beats happen in this compared to the original. To summarize what happens in the modern Corpse Party, Ayumi tells a similar ghost story to the original. However, she mentions that a woman fell down a flight of stairs and died. Afterward, the principal ended up throwing himself off the roof of the school building out of grief. Unlike the original, where the school in the ghost story and the current school were left without a name, the modern version names the schools Heavenly Host Elementary and Kisaragi Academy respectively. After the ghost story, we get to meet some new faces. Seiko Shinohara is a girl who tends to have lewd fantasies and take people by surprise with her humor, a fan favorite. She is Naomi's best friend who likes to tease Satoshi. Her mother disappeared a while back, and so she is the female figure in the household, doing chores and taking care of her little brother, Yu. Sakutaro Morishige is a quiet boy who's antisocial. He sees socializing with others as more trouble than it's worth. He's part of the drama theater area of the school, being a great actor, but he isn't seen as popular. The only person he really talks to is Mayu. Mayu Suzumoto is another quiet one who is very supportive of Morishige. She's a kind individual who's thankful to have friends to be around as a coping mechanism for her situation at home. Her mother and father don't get along well. And finally, Miss Yui Shishido is an English teacher at Kisaragi who's known about Ayumi's story for a while. The story was regarded as being one of the 7 wonders of the academy when she was a student not too long ago. Miss Yui shows up right after the ghost story, mimicking the woman the story referred to and scaring Satoshi Satoshi in the process as part of a prank set up by her and Ayumi. The beginning here plays out similarly to the original, but with some extra flair for the modern audience, and the new characters being thrown into the mix. Before the game started, Class 2-9 were holding a Red Bean Cafe for the school's arts festival. The event, coupled with the ghost story, were meant to be a nice send-off for Mayu. With it being her last day at the academy, the class decides to take a group photo. Afterwards, Ayumi proposes something to the class. A charm named Sachiko Ever After, the purpose of which is similar to friendship bracelets. It's for people to stay friends forever. Despite being suspicious of the whole thing, the class agrees to participate and follow Ayumi's instructions. A paper doll is presented and everyone grabs a hold of it. Then everyone repeats the words "Sachiko, we beg of you" for a total of 9 times, because there's 9 people present. After the charm has been performed, the classroom starts shaking and everyone gets teleported into Heavenly Host. Now we're playing as Naomi and Seiko, who come across a spirit that tells them what kind of school they're in. Unlike in the original, where the haunted school is all one place, the school is its own world that houses multiple versions of the school with different people in them. Naomi and Seiko are in one version of the school. For the rest of the video, I will be referring to each version of the school based on which characters we follow. For example, Chapter 1 is Naomi's version of the school. This will make things easier to explain as we go on. Anyway, spoiler territory coming up by the way, so if you want to play the game for yourself, I'd recommend stopping the video now and find a way to play it. You have been warned. While Naomi and Seiko are exploring the school, aiming to find a way out, they run into various horrifying things and puzzles to solve. Stumbling into the restroom area, Seiko asks Naomi a bizarre question before going into the females' restrooms to do something with some sort of cream. Moving right along, Naomi suddenly hears Yuka's voice echo out into the hallway and decides to investigate. When she goes to check on Seiko, she comes out of a stall that was previously locked. Weird. Afterwards, we get reminded that Naomi has sprained her ankle, making it hard for her to keep going. They enter the infirmary where Seiko makes a splint for Naomi's leg. Hearing Yuka's voice again, Seiko leaves Naomi alone to investigate. Naomi is then chased around by a ghastly spirit that keeps saying weird, incomprehensible things. She manages to escape the infirmary and the spirit disappears. Seiko comes back, unable to find any trace of Yuka. Naomi understandably gets pissed at Seiko for leaving her behind, but starts getting unreasonably pessimistic. Seiko gets pissed at Naomi and they both split up. After being called by a random voice, Seiko wanders off by herself before the screen fades to black. We're back in Naomi's perspective, where she finds herself back in the restrooms. She ends up finding out something terrible, screaming in horror. Seiko is now dead, and there's nothing Naomi can do about it. This ends Chapter 1. Chapter 2 follows a different group, Miss Yui, Ayumi, and Yoshiki. Miss Yui hears screaming that sounds like Naomi's voice. With the other two still in the starting classroom, Ayumi is scared out of her mind. Miss Yui tries to calm her down before deciding to go out and investigate. Yoshiki promises to take care of Ayumi, and now we're in control of Miss Yui. And now we're not in control of Miss Yui. Well, that was short. After she seemingly dies, we're in control of Yoshiki and Ayumi, which is something that is going to continue throughout the game. Midway through the chapter, Ayumi starts acting and saying strange things that make no sense to the player, just like the spirit from the last chapter. Yoshiki manages to snap Ayumi back into reality before she reveals that there's immense spiritual connections between this school and herself. Immediately after that, they find Mayu in the infirmary, talking with 2 child spirits. According to a newspaper that Mayu found, the child spirits are victims of an incident that happened in Heavenly Host. Unfortunately, Yoshiki and Ayumi aren't able to convince the child spirits to let Mayu go. This is where we run into Naho Sayanoki, a paranormal journalist who died in the school prior. She tells the two to look for something that shows remorse from the killer of the child spirits. They find an antique doll that has a creepy voice. Ayumi presents the doll to the spirits, but nothing happens. Eventually, the spirits take Mayu and splatter her across the wall. Horrified at what happened, Ayumi runs away from Yoshiki. A man with an axe comes up from behind Yoshiki and strikes him. Oh, and Miss Yui isn't actually dead. Yay. This ends Chapter 2. Chapter 3 continues from where Chapter 1 leaves off, with Naomi terrified over her friend's death. Naho steps in to explain a concept that exists within Heavenly Hosts called the Darkening. The Darkening is the name of a sort of curse that surrounds the school. Anytime a character has lost their will to live, the Darkening is what represents that depression. To be honest, the Darkening is still a concept that I'm still not entirely familiar with, and I feel is just a way to explain to the player that a person is at their limit. Anyways, Naho tells Naomi that she is the only person that lives in her close space. We then cut away to our new party of people we follow, the siblings. During the entirety of Chapter 3, Satoshi is trying to figure out what's going on, while Yuka has to go to the bathroom. Unfortunately, Heavenly Host has no usable bathrooms due to being so old, and you can't even use the bucket from where you start off. I feel like if Yuka had to go that badly in a school that's already falling apart, would it really matter where to do your business? She could have just told Satoshi to go somewhere else or not look, and then do it in a corner or something. Unfortunately for me, the game has already thought about that and said,
no.
So there goes that plan. Anyways, the two keep hearing voices from Naomi and Ayumi from different points in time. They run into Morishige, who's totally not taking photos of dead people and getting off to it. What would give you that idea? Satoshi and Morishige end up having the most ironic conversation about Mayu. I spy with my little eye something that starts with id and ends in iet. I can't quite put my finger on it. After that pleasant conversation, the two end up in the second wing of the school. They still try to find a bathroom, but no luck. So Satoshi thinks it's a good idea to send Yuka off on her own to do her business outside, past the fences. A ghost attacks her, and now Satoshi is gone. Where did he go? Before Yuka can find that out, she bumps into Morishige, who's still taking pictures of dead people. Then he starts chasing Yuka, presumably to kill her. Thankfully, her brother comes back, bumping into her. But not really. Introducing Yuya Kizami, a second-year student at Byakudan Senior High, who also performed the charm from the beginning of the game and got separated from his friends. He says that he's also lost his little sister, so now both him and Yuka have something to look for. They team up to find whatever both are looking for. Yuka finally finds a room of bathroom stalls and goes in. After that, we get introduced to one of Kizami's friends. Kensuke Kurosaki isn't that interesting to me, if I'm being honest. But he seems to run his mouth a lot, so much so that Kizami ends up stabbing him and kicking him down a hall. So now Kizami is a crazed killer too. Great! Oh, and look who's decided to wake up. It's our favorite average human being, Satoshi. He's been inside a room that's inaccessible, so his disappearance makes sense. He finds a few pieces of documentary notes from a guy named Ko Kibiki, who is also Naho's mentor. Kibiki is one of the first of many people to document Heavenly Host and the charm that sends people down there. Satoshi is greeted by Naho, who keeps being annoying and saying someone messed up the charm on purpose and that's how they ended up there. Naho then teleports Satoshi away. This ends Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is a bit confusing, so I'll give an extremely short version. We learn about Mayu's first experience of the school, Yuka is still not able to go to the bathroom due to dead bodies in the stalls, and Kizami is completely crazy after remembering the time he thought about having a little sister. Satoshi meets up with Naomi, who seemingly tried to hang herself but actually didn't. We learn from this that people can get possessed in this school against their will and do things they wouldn't normally do. Ayumi goes back into the school to meet up with Yoshiki again, and they manage to collect some tongues and return them to the three ghost children. They manage to make it back to their own school, but not really. One of the ghost children emerges and tells them that their efforts weren't good enough and that they have to go back. Sounds familiar? Anyway, Satoshi and Naomi come across the custodian's closet that houses a TV with a camcorder on it. There, they read more into Kibiki's studies regarding the incident that happened with the ghost children and Sachiko. While this exposition is happening, we get to physically see the incident happen as one of the ghost children takes Ayumi back to when the incident happened and through the child's perspective. We learn that the culprit was actually Sachiko. That's right, the one who did all those horrible things in the newspapers and all that. It's Sachiko. Now with that out of the way, I would talk about Chapter 5 in great detail, but if I did, we'd be here for a while, and there's already so much to cover with this series. So instead of talking about all the little details, I'll give my thoughts on the chapter and the ending of the game. After you get chased by Kizami as Yuka at the start, and Kizami ends up dead, Morishige learns about Mayu's death and launches himself out the window. Cool. Yoshiki and Ayumi end up going back into the school. Cool. And the school has completely changed in a way that makes this my favorite chapter. Firstly, Chapter 5 is similar to how the original 1996 Corpse Party plays out. The background music for this chapter is remixes of the original game's music, which is fun to listen to. You're able to switch between the two parties using pentagrams, with the two parties being the same as the original. Ayumi and Yoshiki being on one side, with Satoshi, Naomi, and Yuka on the other. Some of the story beats and the layout of the school are direct references to the original game. A lot of the important areas such as the incinerator, the science lab, and other places are in the places that they are in the original. The only parts that are different from the original, as to be expected, are a few gameplay things you'd need to do to get the best ending, and the vast majority of things that had to be done to connect this chapter with the previous ones. There are little notes from Naho that detail the charm from the beginning of the game and how to escape Heavenly Host. To reverse what Ayumi had done, all pieces from the original charm that was performed to get here have to be present, then the charm has to be performed correctly. Remember when I said that everyone chanted 9 times due to there being 9 people present? Ayumi thought that was the right instructions, but they were actually wrong! Because the charm came from Naho's blog, the instructions on there were purposefully written to be incorrect to lure people into the school to die. Ayumi is understandably incredibly angry over this discovery and ends up confronting Naho by revealing what she was doing before she died in the school. She was strangling her mentor, Ko Kibiki, and killed him in the process. Naho flies up into the air and disappears. After that, we get a very long cutscene of the events that were told through Ayumi's story at the beginning of the game. Sachiko's mother, Yoshie, is pushed down a flight of stairs and dies. She was pushed down by the principal of the school at the time while Sachiko was watching. The principal then chases Sachiko down hallways before finding her and killing her. No matter what though, Yoshie and Sachiko were spiritually bound to the school over that incident. The principal started going crazy over what happened and ended up offing himself from on top of the school building. After a bunch more sections of exposition and storytelling and Miss Yue dying, both parties landed the abandoned bomb shelter, the place where Sachiko was buried. Satoshi tries his best to appease Sachiko's spirit by using items we collected throughout the chapter, to prove that her killing people that were sent into the school isn't making anyone happy, not even her mother. Just like in the original, Sachiko is screaming at the top of her lungs as she's about to disappear. All 5 of the remaining people attempt the charm reversal by chanting 6 times to include Sachiko in the count. Then everyone has to run because the school's about to crash down on them. They run outside and get teleported back to their school at last. All is right with the world. Except now, everyone who died in the school has been erased out of existence completely, even down to people not remembering who they are by a simple mention of their names. And that's the modern day Corpse Party. If I have anything to say about the game, it's a fun top-down style horror game that started what others have tried to do over the years. It's what most people were introduced to when getting into the RPG Maker horror genre. I got into the game very late into its popularity, but I still had a fun time with it. Now for those who are thinking that I'm going to be covering the spin-offs and sequels, I'll do that in the shortest way possible now. Book of Shadows is the sequel to the game I just talked about. It's in a visual novel point-and-click format, and most people did not like this one. It has a bunch of what-if scenarios that play off of different things that happened in the first game, with some debatably canonical stuff leading up to the actual continuation of the previous game, with Ayumi and Naomi trying to reverse their friends' deaths, and failing, and then Ayumi's sister dies too. Great. Sweet Sachiko's Hysteric Birthday Bash, 2U for short, is a spin-off that's in the middle of Book of Shadows and Blood Drive that is entirely non-canon to the main series. Since this game is an anthology, it has a lot of scenarios written by Kedwin and other writers that have more interactions between the characters than the main series. It has a reference to the original Corpse Party, which I love. There's some one-off characters here that we never see again, not even in the sequel of Book of Shadows, because everything got the big reset button right at the end of the game. Great. Blood Drive continues from where Book of Shadows left off, going back to the original RPG Maker style, but in 3D. This was originally released on the PlayStation Vita and ran horribly as a result. Again, this one wasn't well liked either. It still had the Book of Shadows problem of too much dialogue with very little actually happening, and a bunch of other annoying things. At least the PC, Switch, and Android versions make it tolerable, but still. The entire game is pretty much just more Heavenly Host shenanigans because Ayumi just can't let her friends die for whatever reason. After the events of what happens in this game, Ayumi is left in a vegetable state with Yoshiki taking care of her, and no one remembers them. How sad. Meanwhile, Naomi has pretty much been adopted into Satoshi's household because her mother thinks she's a freak, and we never hear from these characters again for years. And that's the Heavenly Host saga. After Team Grigri made it big with their hit game, they decided to make a sequel that continued from where Blood Drive left off. Sort of. Introducing Corpse Party 2 Dead Patient. Since we're in the hands of Team Grigri and not mages, this game has never gotten any remakes or ports, making the PC version the only way to experience it. This also means that the indie horror game vibe from the original 2008 release of Corpse Party is here too, minus the cutesy art. Dead Patient follows a girl named Ayame who is stuck in a hospital. She meets up with various people in her goal to escape the hospital while dealing with various scenarios, people, and zombies. This is where some people have issues with Dead Patient being labeled as a Corpse Party game. We've jumped from the spiritual and ritual side of things to SWAT teams and zombies. You know, like in The Walking Dead or something. There may be some people that don't have an issue with this approach since there's nothing else to do with Heavenly Host story-wise, but I feel like this is too big of a departure from what made Corpse Party's identity as a horror game. Plus, since the game is in constant development hell, we'll never know if the zombie approach has any meaning to the story. Dead Patient only has 2 playable chapters, Chapter 1 and Extra Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is pretty much what I just described, with Extra Chapter 1 following Satoshi. People keep waiting and waiting for Chapter 2 to come out, and there's probably only one answer that can be said here. It's not gonna happen. Dead Patient already had drama CD releases that focus on the story of the game, but I'm not sure if these CDs continue the story or if they add anything at all. Unless Team Grigri can strike another deal with mages to help develop Dead Patient, it's going to be stuck in an unfinished state for the rest of its existence. I forgot to mention that Corpse Party has some media adaptations, and I'll briefly cover them here. Released around the time that Book of Shadows was releasing, Corpse Party had an OVA titled Missing Footage, which gave some insight to the events that leads up to Ayumi performing the charm. Eventually, an OVA series titled Tortured Souls was made that adapts the story of the modern-day Corpse Party in animated form. The series is an attempt to squeeze 5 chapters into 4 episodes, and a lot of people either hated or loved this adaptation. It's a mixed bag. On one hand, it's cool to see the characters and events that happen in the game animated. On the other, it ends up butchering the game's story by leaving out certain characters and the pacing suffering as a consequence. It also doesn't have the same ending as the game. Ayumi, Naomi, and Satoshi are the only ones left by the end. While they do manage to appease Sachiko's spirit just like the game, they also screw up in the worst way possible. They're about to perform the reversal to get back, and then Satoshi ends up pulling a pretty dumb move by using someone else's piece of the charm, a piece that wasn't a part of their original ritual, and thus Satoshi is left armless, or bodiless, depending on perspective. Finally, the last official media adaptations of Corpse Party come in the form of the live-action films. Remember when Aoni had live-action films, and how the first one was bad and the second one was good? Corpse Party has a similar situation, but instead of both films being based on the same story, they're based on the modern-day Corpse Party game and Book of Shadows, respectively. The first live-action film, however, is pretty much just a rehash of Tortured Souls. So if you're planning on watching it after watching the OVA, do not. You'd be wasting your time seeing the same things happening all over again. Plus, the film has some moments that really make you question the production budget. If you want to continue from Tortured Souls, or if you haven't seen Tortured Souls and want to continue from the first live-action film, go watch the Book of Shadows movie instead. It has way better production value and is probably a more tolerable way to experience Book of Shadows' story. While on the topic of media based on the games, Corpse Party has a plethora of manga adaptations, with one being the most praised. The Corpse Party Blood-Covered series, illustrated by Toshimi Shinomiya. This series was released around the time that the 2008 PC version was growing in popularity, meaning that this series shares a lot of similarities with that version of the game. This adaptation is the greatest, if not the best media adaptation of the modern-day Corpse Party I've experienced. The writing is so well done and the artwork complements it so masterfully, I actually ended up caring about the characters more and tearing up towards the end. To avoid spoiling the experience and to not repeat myself, please go find copies of this adaptation and give it a read. With that being said, this is the end of the RPG Maker trilogy. Hopefully the games I picked were interesting to hear about, and if other RPG Maker games come along that I get interested in, I may make episodes talking about them. But these 3, Aoni, Ib, and Corpse Party, were the 3 that, to me, had a lot of information to cover that interested me a lot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to leave for work. Alright, I have my suit on, have my hair cut fresh for my first day. Okay.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
Son of a bitch!